Okay, and there we go. So welcome once again, everyone, to what is going to be the last panel session of the conference. For this session, which is entitled The Pedagogy of Digital Middle Ages, our chair is going to be Andrew Elliott. Andrew was our lecturer, our closing keynote lecturer last year. It's always a pleasure to have him with us. Andrew is a professor from the University of Lincoln. He works with the use of the Middle Ages in popular media, in cinema, in video games, and his most recent work has been the use of medievalisms in politics and media. So Andrew, again, it's great to have you back, and you can take it from there.
Thank you so much. It's yes, genuinely a pleasure. So I'm delighted to present this panel on the pedagogy of digital Middle Ages. We're going to swap the order of the papers just because of a slide share issue we had before. So we're going to start with Petra, and then we'll do Jonathan and Iskren, and we'll hold all questions to the end as we've been doing. So we're starting with Petra Kolesaric, I think. Petra Kolesaric completed her undergraduate and graduate studies in history and pedagogy in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Josip Juraj Strossmayer University in Osijek. She's currently working as an external assistant in the Department of History at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Osijek, and as a history teacher at the Technical School and Natural Sciences School in Osijek. She's a doctoral student at the postgraduate doctoral study in pre-modern history at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in the University of Zagreb. Her area of interest is the medieval period of Croatian history and archival pedagogy. She's also, and congratulations for this, Petra, a winner of the award for the best work for young historians from the history of Slavonia, Srijem and Baranja in 2020 with a paper entitled Convicts of Valpovo Manorial Estate, 1812 to 1847. Today, she's using her pedagogical experience to talk to us about Croatian history students' use of digital medieval content. So I'll yield the floor to you, Petra.
Thank you, Professor Elliott. So I greet you all once again and thank the organizers for accepting my topic. In today's presentation, I will present the results of a research conducted among Croatian history students on digital medieval content. And in the presentation, I will look at the theoretical background and research methodology. I will present the most important research results and the possibilities of the further research. In the introduction, I would like to say why undergraduate and graduate students of history in the Republic of Croatia were chosen in the first place. So digital medieval content can be used by anyone interested in such content. However, history students are already highly profiled experts who, in addition to using digital medieval content, also know the material and sources on the basis of which some digital medieval content could have been created, and thus they value it at a higher level than the rest of the population. In addition, I wanted to see if students use digital medieval content more for educational purposes or for leisure. In the terms of conducted research on this topic, it can be said that various historians and other scholars have already extensively researched this topic of the use of digital historical and even medieval content. Regarding the involvement of students in digital medieval content, I would highlight that there are many projects in which students were involved in the conceptualizing, designing, and other stages of project development. Also, at several universities, including Croatian ones, some form of digital medieval content is taught as part of various courses. However, so far, I have not found any similar research conducted on the student population, a research that would concern their use and attitudes about digital medieval content. The languages I researched in are, of course, English, German, Croatian, and languages similar to Croatian, but I have not found any similar content, and that was certainly a motivation to conduct this research. The aim of this empirical research was to discover which digital content on the Middle Ages the students encountered and used, to what extent they are satisfied with its quality, if it's widely available to the student population, whether they think it contributes to their learning, and how they would improve certain content or develop similar ones. Based on the research aim, the following hypotheses were established. First hypothesis was history students' socio-demographic traits are not significant in relation to using digital medieval content. Second hypothesis was history students are using digital medieval content in a statistically significant number. And third hypothesis was history students who use digital medieval content are statistically significantly dissatisfied with them. So a two-part questionnaire was constructed for the purposes of this research. No standardized instruments were implemented. The first part consisted of 4 general questions concerning socio-demographic traits, first university, then study, year of study, and gender. The rest of the questionnaire consisted of 15 questions related to the use of and the satisfaction with various digital medieval content. The convenience sample was chosen to reflect the characteristics of the history students population in Croatia. So 82 participants, students of history from 7 universities took part in the research. That makes up around 5 to 10% of the population. In empirical research that shows that 5% of the population is needed to for representative results, so that the results are applicable to the whole population. The research was conducted in March and April 2022 with history students in Croatia. All participants were informed about the research goals and were guaranteed complete anonymity in line with the ethical code. The results were analyzed using SPSS advanced statistics with descriptive and inferential statistics. Regarding the participants, it should be said that 20% of students attend single major history studies, while 80% of them attend double major studies. According to the representation by years, the most of the students in the study attend first and second year of undergraduate study, and about 50% of students are male and about 50% are female. When asked how many students used digital medieval content at least once during their studies, 73% of them answered that they did, while 27% did not use digital medieval content at all. When it comes to which digital medieval content the students use most often, we can say that students use movies, series, and video games almost equally. Still, the films stands out as somewhat more frequently used, but without much difference. Several students answered that they most frequently use some other form of digital medieval content, primarily music and books. In order to assess the most popular films, series, and video games among history students, I offered them 10 most popular medieval films according to IMDb. The series were selected by the same criterion, and I selected the 10 most popular games according to various websites. The most popular films among students were Braveheart, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, Kingdom of Heaven, Knight's Tale, Excalibur, and The King. The most popular series with medieval content among Croatian history students are, of course, Game of Thrones and The Vikings, followed by The Witcher and The Tudors. And surprisingly, Netflix, The Rise of Empires Ottoman, stood out as the 5th most popular series among history students. Assassin's Creed stood out as the most popular video game, followed by Crusader Kings, then Kingdom Come Deliverance, For Honor, and Chivalry 2. Regarding the purpose for which history students use digital medieval content, 53% of students answered that they use digital medieval content for both learning and leisure. 35% use it exclusively for entertainment, and 10% use it exclusively for learning. As for the shortcomings of current digital medieval content in the context of their use, 54.1% of students say that they are not accurate enough and well presented to the general public. 40% of students believe that there is more digital historical content from other historical periods like the 20th century, while 5.9% of students see a disadvantage in the fact that their use requires payment. When asked about improvements they would like to see in digital medieval content, 66% said the historical accuracy was necessary, commenting that there is currently a large number of film series and video games that often place contemporary elements in the Middle Ages. 90% of them would like greater diversity of content, which refers to the wish for the digital medieval content to represent history outside of the major historical events and for the focus not to be exclusively on political history. They would like to see more social history, marginal groups, and the like in the digital medieval content. And 8% of history students believe that the greater digitalization of medieval content is needed. I singled out one comment from a student who more or less summarizes all the students' answers. This respondent singled out that films, series, and video games are in fact art based on historical facts, and it is not a problem to see some historical inaccuracies as long as everything like fashion, circumstances, and like is credibly portrayed. With regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, the students stated that their professors sent them some digital medieval content during online classes. So I wanted to examine whether they were happy with it and whether they wanted to use digital medieval content at all. On this issue, 83% of them agree or fully agree that they would like to use digital medieval content as a part of medieval college courses. In the terms of inferential statistics, t-test and ANOVA were used, but no links were found with differences in university study, years of study, or gender. What was found was the correlation between students' opinions. I pointed out that students who have used digital medieval content are also dissatisfied with it. The R coefficient means that 95% of students who used digital medieval content were not satisfied with some or all of them. According to the framework of the research, all hypotheses have been confirmed. Namely, the first hypothesis, which stated that students' opinions are not related to their socio-demographic characteristics, has been proven because no differences in student opinion were established with regards to the gender, university study, or year of study. The second hypothesis has been confirmed as well, because a significant number of history students do use digital medieval content, and they are interested in it. The third hypothesis, which referred to the fact that students who use digital medieval content are not statistically significantly satisfied with them, was proven by correlation analysis. Therefore, it is possible to single out several characteristics of the research and wishes of Croatian history students in relation to digital medieval content. Students want greater historical authenticity, more digital medieval content, and more topics in that content. It can be concluded that this empirical research on attitudes of Croatian history students in the use of digital medieval content has achieved its goal. Namely, the presented results support the fact that students are an important population to keep in mind when designing digital medieval content, that their views should be greatly respected because they use these contents and will use them more if they are satisfied with them. Since this is the first research of this type, it is necessary to conduct further researches on this and similar topic. This is the literature I use in preparing the presentation and research, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Petra. That was fantastic. A really well-structured and stimulating paper. I'm absolutely certain there will be a lot of questions about your paper, so please don't rush off. And now in the change to the advertised program, we're going to switch back to what was scheduled to be our first speaker. Okay, Do we have Jonathan's? Yeah, I can see.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to start sharing your screen here, Jonathan, while I introduce you? So our next speaker is Jonathan Doberski. Jonathan is a fieldwork archaeologist in the employ of Wessex Archaeology. He's a graduate of the University of Reading. He's previously spent 3 years as a historic properties steward at Stonehenge, experiencing firsthand the intersection of public and academic understanding of archaeology and archaeological sites. He maintains a strong interest in the potential of popular media to affect public understanding of the past, obviously a strong link to the previous paper, whether to inform or to reinforce. He operates in and cryptically also sometimes beyond Southwest England. Today, Jonathan's going to talk to us about the Middle Ages as a digital experience. So I will yield the floor to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. I will just like to hedge things. This is my first conference, so if this isn't quite to the standard you'd expect, I do apologize for that. But yes, as is somewhat been, within the news lately, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is quite of interest, particularly as a potential virtual exhibition space, and I wanted to actually explore how it actually goes about disseminating information, and particularly what I call the selective engagement it employs in that educational content. And so here we go. Oh, if I can get this actually far up. So for broader context, Assassin's Creed is a video game series and media franchise published by Ubisoft Entertainment. Its key premise is that through advanced technology, a player character can explore genetic memories and experience the past from the perspective of one who lived it. Through this conceit, the franchise has enabled millions to explore and engage with past settings such as the Third Crusade, the American Revolution, Ptolemaic Egypt, and most recently 9th century England in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The franchise has in turn gained a reputation for its accuracy. If not an exact narrative, because to our knowledge Robespierre was not part of an ancient cult bent on world domination, its locations and materials have certainly been lauded for their assumed authenticity. Historical tourism is a term that comes up often around the games and has granted Ubisoft particular legitimacy within this space. These are just a small selection of quotes that have come up from around the franchise, some of which is to do with the original game when it first came out, the development of Assassin's Creed Origins, which particularly got noticed for the collaborations done with historians in its development. This one was more of a counter to suggestions that flagged up about using Assassin's Creed Unity as to somehow help recreate Notre Dame. This was specifically an invocation of the whole historical vacation argument that came up around Assassin's Creed 3 when it first released. So this association, this idea the series is a valid way of exploring the past, has been around for a while, but it did take a shift within the last few years with the Discovery Tour. As with each entry in the recent Mythology trilogy, that is Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, Ubisoft has released subsequent Discovery Tours. They are, to quote Ubisoft themselves, dedicated educational, interactive, and violence-free experiences that let players discover about the history and daily life of the Viking Age, ancient Greece, and ancient Egypt, end quote, using the assets of the base games to create an explorable space, arguably a virtual museum or exhibition space. These are explicitly promoted as content suitable for the classroom, complete with curriculums available through the Discovery Tour website. It is thus worth considering how they function as such, what strengths and weaknesses they may hold. In this paper, where the tour is notably silent or selective in the portrayal of its materials and the history surrounding such, is of particular interest. So, specific to the Valhalla implementation of the Discovery Tour, Viking Age is a narrative experience, one where players go through the lives of given avatars, as in the main game. An example of this being the character of Thorstein, who you can see here, who decides to migrate to England, with the story exploring the preparations that he and his wife Gunhilda must go through for the journey. This contrasts to the more exhibition-like experiences of previous titles. The same nodes, displays of information are present, but they are localized to the general area of the story quest, slightly off from the main paths that you will follow. So if you go down the main road, there'll be a side street, there'll be a display there. In this example, we have Thorstein walking the streets of Stavanger, and from this display, information regarding the surrounding history of the site and how it was designed is given to the player, and quite a nice little touch up here. However, things to consider is that though far smaller in real life, the map of England in Valhalla, our primary setting, though not the entirety of either the game or the tour, is still quite substantial, comparable to a large town or small city for like actual area. Represented within that is a geographical range of Yorkshire under the Kingdom of Northumbria down to the Isle of Wight, with settlements and landmarks scattered throughout. The limited scope of the Discovery Tour means that most players are not led to most locations on this map. In fact, the tour's content within England, 4 out of the 8 story episodes, several take place within Norway, 1 in Asgard, long story. These are only nested around a slice of Hamptonshire from Chippenham into Winchester, the city of Jorvik, and the Isle of Ely. Much of the information provided through the tour is aimed at the general time period, but the marketing has been very much driven by landmarks and locations, which may have no information attached to them. As a case study of this, my former place of work, Stonehenge has held a very visible place in the marketing of Assassin's Creed Valhalla and associated media with it. To the right are just a couple of examples of this, including the promotional art and title screen of the Viking Age Discovery Tour. The monument also features in the tour's launch trailer, visited by Forstein, implying that one will visit the monument in the tour. Despite this, the Discovery Tour has no content relating to Stonehenge, nor is it easily found. The site is unnamed on the world map. The promotional image here of a monk approaching a trilithon, something unique to Stonehenge in the British Isles, is in fact set at Avebury. Except this Avebury, or Avebury Megaliths, is located just outside of Winchester in Hamptonshire, rather than the north of Wiltshire. It only loosely resembles its namesake, comprised of 2 small circles of stones with adjacent ditches. Even at the maximum level of zoom within the map here, the Stonehenge site is neither named nor easily discerned for anyone not already familiar with its layout. I can see the circle of the stones in the inner horseshoe here, a lot of people would not. And the little gold boxes that indicate the location here is the result of me taking photos within the game. A fresh player would not see these. Despite the marketing, the tour does not facilitate finding the site, as if it wasn't actually of interest to talk about, or they presumed players would simply search how to find Stonehenge Assassin's Creed in Google or YouTube. Relatedly, we have Avebury. So the tour also makes no mention of the discussion of the mentioned alterations to Avebury. The description of megalithic structures it does provide, seen here, is incredibly loose at best and avoids any explicit contrast of the game monument versus the real-world counterpart. This despite being attached to said counterpart, while also getting its definition of henge wrong. This is notable, however, as it can be directly compared to the very open discussion that the monastery at Ely gets, both happening with the same character, with the developers acknowledging how they have had to use a technically anachronistic template, but that was broadly comparable from France, as well as providing rationale for some of the alterations they've made. Here we have a measurable difference in what the game and its creators are willing to admit to. As another case study, Ireland. The Viking Age Discovery Tour is specifically built on the base game of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the core experience as first released. This means there is no content from subsequent major expansions like Wrath of the Druids or The Siege of Paris. As a result, the Discovery Tour avoids any discussion of the choices and materials specific to those expansions. For Wrath of the Druids, this means the Discovery Tour offers no insight on the construction of Dublin's Norse Gaelic culture, why 5th to 6th century kings of the O'Neill dynasty are being buried in Neolithic tombs, or the abundance of decidedly Bronze Age material culture active in use in the 9th century CE. But we must recognize realities of production here, particularly that the team which developed the Discovery Tour is not the team that developed the core game, or its other expansions, as listed in the credits. They even had to consult members of those other teams for their insights on the production, and give credit to such in the tour. This means the Discovery Tour had a separate production pipeline, schedule, and eventually release date, that being October 2021. The base game was released November 2020. The surest set of variables for working on such a project is to work within the base game, what every pre-existing player will have access to as they receive the Discovery Tour for free. It also reduces the number of elements that might change from ongoing development versus the tour as it's being worked on. With 11 months between Valhalla's release and the tours, that's a good buffer to have. This is a practical framework, as is narrowing what locations to focus and potentially speak on, versus having to cover what was a very broad sprawl, as you saw earlier. It also means that players do not get to see any paid DLC content for free. That the Discovery Tour is built on a pre-existing game may be a limit in other ways. There may be restrictions, whether practical or editorial, to alter existing assets. The credited team is substantially smaller than the core game as well. As a result, if the original game has elements of its world that are inaccurate or a matter of artistic license, there is likely little means or sufficient incentive to fix them for an educational context, especially if they could just be left unaddressed by not even appearing in the guided tour. Meaning, if there is no easy way to remove the barbaric pagan coding on the Scottish raiders, that is, the Picts, who appear in the game, woad-bearing skulls and all, despite their codex entry seen here in the main game, noting that they have been converted to Christianity by this point, it may be easier to not discuss them altogether in the Discovery Tour, which also avoids assigning any blame in the process on their fellow developers. This even assumes that their fellow developers actually have a ready answer to give on why they made a certain design choice, possibly first made years ago given the lengths of such developments, which might not always be there. This issue of existing assets extends to locations that are part of the game world specifically for Assassin's Creed lore, for the fantasy narrative interlaced within the historical framework. Where these locations are barred only by the ability of the player to climb, jump, and dive to them, instead of specific mechanics only usable in the base game, they are still present and accessible in the Discovery Tour, such as with the secret Isu barracks beneath Stonehenge that houses Excalibur and has an invented language derived from Proto-Indo-European. That's what's written on the stone here, to clarify, while down here is a bit of Ogham written by King Arthur himself. While there are behind-the-scenes data points around constructing the simulation of the game, this largely does not extend to game-exclusive concepts, with exceptions seeming to be because of detachment from narrative context, such as the game's invented version of the real-world game of Orlog, actual methodology lost to us, or the game's logo itself, things that do not have to relate to the story. Meanwhile, it can be argued doubtful that anyone will find a location like this without already knowing it from the base game. But it does remain possible, and there is no insight to gain for doing so. So I do not get an explanation for second Stonehenge. Even within the displays, the tour can be selective in what information it provides to the audience. This was touched on earlier with the example of Megaliths versus Ely, but it's present in other codex entries, such as A Humble Abode, which details the castles in the game. By listing the fortress inspirations, just like so, Porchester, Derby, Goodrich, Housesteads, the Remnant Fort, Hadrian's Wall, actually several of those, or Castell Trefaldwyn in Wales, it avoids discussing particulars, such as how several of those are of a Norman or later date, despite this being set in the 9th century. Meanwhile, there are descriptions that do not list their academic citations, most of them really, even for potentially quite specific academia. The idea of horses as taboo on ships is, according to Maxime Durand, world design director for the Discovery Tour, likely drawn from the work of Christa Westerdahl, I assume I have not just completely butchered that pronunciation, whose views of boats as a liminal space are also referenced in the tour, while the animal taboo thing is over here. This in turn descends of the works of scholars like Jacob Jacobsen on the etymology of place names in Shetland, and none of that is clarified here or given a lead to follow. But then that is how a museum exhibition and its labels handle such, often simplifying information or easing off nuance in the name of digestibility. The expectation is that the truly interested will do their further research as a result of having that prompt, as Duran noted in speaking to the podcast Gone Medieval. But how easy is this information to find? Speaking anecdotally, for this, not very, if you don't already know at least one scholar to include in your search terms. I could find this once I knew that Westerdahl was involved, but just Viking horse taboo at sea and variants thereof will bring up far more modern social restrictions or decidedly non-taboo treatment of horses. Named castles are a lot easier. They can run, but they can't hide. The subject of further research is an interesting matter, both as a possible resolution to where the tour's engagement is limited, but also as an exposure of those limits. In the previously mentioned podcast, Gone Medieval, Recreating the Viking World in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Durand explains how artists were given reference for Motte and Bailey castles, as would have been period appropriate during consultancy on the original game, but they weren't excited for them. Castles of earth and wood did not spark their creativity. This is a frank admission of how artistic urges may override strict accuracy, and it may be one easier to admit in a podcast aimed at slightly more enthusiast listeners than within a more public medium aimed at one's own audience. Similarly, Durand notes that one of the basic liberties any Assassin's Creed game will apply is to increase the height of things, because climbing novel landmarks is a key feature and selling point. The first Assassin's Creed game to actually admit this was not Valhalla, but the fourth main entry in the series, Assassin's Creed E4 Black Flag, but it only did so under the veil of meta-humor. It's not Ubisoft doing this, it's Abstergo, the in-universe company that you spend a lot of time fighting because they're the Templars. Not all information concerning the game's inspirations and influences are to be found in communities aimed at historical and archaeological enthusiasts, however. There is information, however implicit, to be found on the development of Second Stonehenge, but on ArtStation, a portfolio website for professional artists. As according to the artist of this piece, this is concept artwork of a shamanic cave I've done for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Another level artist page, showing the final location, dubs it Modron's Cave, Modron being a druid maintaining the old ways in Gloucestershire. While it doesn't bridge the further modification into the more Stonehenge-specific arrangement of the finished game, it contextualizes how the developers understood the location and its purpose in a way that neither the core game nor the Discovery Tour provide. Second Stonehenge is an admittedly extreme example to focus on of the Discovery Tour's various omissions. It is a wholly fantastical, ahistorical construct of the game, nestled deep in a way most players of the Discovery Tour alone would never find. However, it encapsulates all the challenges posed to the Discovery Tour's premise of presenting and educating on the past, a reinforcement from the outset of the fantastical and ahistorical associations placed upon its real-world inspiration that the game, or at least the Discovery Tour, could bring into question or contextualize with actual archaeology. It does not do so, whether as a consequence of the practical limitations referred to in this paper, it's too far off the tool or route, it's too particular explain all these narrative elements you'd have to put in, or because the curators of this greater exhibition simply did not desire to do so. There are many, often quieter, examples of this issue throughout the game. Even if the developers of the Discovery Tour have had to pick and choose their battles over what they could address and how they could do so, they still made those choices, and they must be considered as we weigh the value of this experience as an educational one. So to reiterate, the selective engagement of the Discovery Tour can be measured in the following ways: a limited space of engagement within the tour, a limit of the subjects engaged with in that space, a limited detail and clarification to the engagement the tour provides, an engagement which exists external of the tour, but that could have been presented within it. The nature of these criticisms reveal that despite the change of format that was mentioned, towards a more narrative experience, the Discovery Tour in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is still very much in form an exhibition space, with much of the same strengths and flaws to be found in visiting any museum. In some ways, it's actually become more so of an exhibition, as it is now expressly defined by its space syntax. One could make a heat map of the Viking Age Discovery Tour, showing where people have been, just as one does with the British Museum and its exhibitions. The standard exhibition, however, does not easily find its way into one's living room, bedroom, or even classroom. It cannot be loaded onto a laptop or a portable PC like the Steam Deck and then taken anywhere for as little as the cost of the exhibition ticket itself. Ubisoft may list the full price as about £50, but you can easily find the game for 15 or so. This is even before you consider that for getting to such an exhibition, that may come after an expensive flight, a train ride, or perhaps a hotel booking, especially if you want to go into the heart of London. The alternative here is a tempting one, even before the explicitly stated promise of its educational value. With historians and cultural institutions acting as partners, Ubisoft's standing here to a casual audience is established. Hence, we must consider, specific to the Discovery Tour, as with anything claiming to speak with authority on the matter of the past, what claims it makes, what detail it omits or fails to clarify, and the circumstances that may have led to those choices, as much rooted in general principle as the structure of its game design, demonstrated here today. To do so is to best integrate it into the educational framework, as this is otherwise already in motion and so must be accounted for going forward. That is the sum of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm struggling to find my reactions here. There we are. Virtual applause here. That is another fantastic paper. And also, I'm amazed at how neatly the two papers we've had already merged together. And I'm very excited about the third paper, as it does, at least from the title, promise to run in Iskren. Could I ask you to try sharing your screen now while I read your introduction? Do you have yes, you had a PowerPoint, didn't you?
I hope that this time it will be successful.
Yes, it's absolutely spot on.
Okay.
Fantastic. So our third speaker today is Iskren Velikov, who's a museologist, historian, and curator at the Ruze Regional Museum of History. That's what Google says the pronunciation is. I hope I haven't mangled it. His research interests and publications focus on the historical processes from the late Middle Ages to the period of what we call the recent past, but also on visual anthropology and the methods for constructing a narrative for the past in a museum environment. In 2020, he received a PhD degree in the Institute of Ethnology and Folklore Studies at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, with thesis on the museum representations of the Bulgarian national revival period. And your is your co-speaker here, Iskren?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and he'll be joined by Martin Kostov. Also welcome, Martin, who's co-founder and CEO of Tornado Studios Limited, as well as co-founder and COO of Digital Reality Lab Limited. He and his team are specializing in the field of photorealistic 3D solutions for businesses, games, marketing, cultural heritage, and much, much more. They've created digital doubles of both Cherven Medieval Fortress and Ivanovo Monastery. More than that, they've restored them to their glory from the 14th century in a VR digital form. And today, Iskren and Martin are going to talk to us about digital experiences for the Bulgarian Middle Ages in the museum environment. So I will yield the floor to you.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very interesting event. So far, the presentations were really great. As you can see from the title, we have several keywords actually here. This is the digital experience, the Bulgarian Middle Ages, and museum environment. These three combinations don't usually go much together in our country, unfortunately, for actually a number of several reasons, mainly financial, of course. And this is the reason that our museum in the town of Ruze, the pronunciation is right, is actually proud to be one of the really first to offer a VR experience to our visitors. But before that, I will just give a little bit of history of what are we going to present. The main sites, as you already saw, are the medieval town of Cherven and the rock-hewn churches of Ivanovo. So, some visuals. This is what the medieval town of Cherven looked like in the 19th century. As you can see, there was only one single tower standing above the ground and nothing else was visible. This is what the citadel of the medieval town looks like today. You can see the main highlights that are related to the history of the town. Its major peak was during the 14th century, as you already said. It had strong links with the capital of Tarnovgrad. It had developed commerce, crafts, Christian center for this region of Bulgaria, a very strong garrison. It And nowadays, the visitors on the site can see the preserved remains, but only remains, of fortification walls and the moat, the castle of Cherven, 16 churches so far, vast residential zones, crafts workshop, bronze foundries, 2 water supplies, and necropolises. What is the problem related to what visitors can see on the site will be addressed a little bit later. And now on to the second site. This is the rock-hewn churches of Ivanovo, which is actually a World Heritage Site, one of the really few in Bulgaria. This is the outlook of this place. As you can imagine, a rock-hewn church is a church that is rock-hewn into the cliff. But the interior is the thing that makes it fascinating, especially the state of preservation of the frescoes. We have one very rare example of 14th century frescoes that are very strongly related to the Byzantine canon of frescoes in the churches. This is what specialists call Paleonogan Renaissance. So for these reasons, more than 40 years ago, this site was listed as a World Heritage Site. Now, a little bit about the problems. How do we narrate the story for the Middle Ages in the region of Russia today? As you can see, mainly and only with the means of the classical museology. On the site, we have information boards in 2 languages at least. We offer a lot of images. We offer QR codes for future digital content. The things that one can see in the Museum of History itself, as you can see, is a classical display case with artifacts that were found during the excavations. We're talking about more than a century of excavations on the site and still ongoing because it's not finished. But all of these things cannot actually give a very clear perspective of what these sites look like back in the days. So how could this narrative be made more relatable? Of course, I have to mention the project that the things that you're going to see are happening. This is the Danube's Archaeological In Landscapes project, which was financed according to the Interreg Danube's and it most importantly, there are 10 partners from 10 countries along the Danube. Each of the partners is developing such a VR content. But the main idea is that it doesn't matter which of the sites one is going to visit. He will be going to see all of the products that were developed during this project, which is good because this way these countries are bringing together heritage not only of different chronology but of different cultures together in one place. And actually, in the early days of May, we're hoping to unveil our VR products. They're still under development. So this is only one photo of what one can see on the site of Cherven today. I'm going to speak by memory. The highest point of preservation of any walls is not higher than 2 meters. So this is a very serious problem for our visitors to receive any idea how did these sites look like and how glorious they were actually. It doesn't matter how vivid a narrative we're creating. It is not something that one can imagine the same way as another person. And if you allow me, here I will switch places with Mr. Martin Kostov, who is the developer of these splendid things that you're going to see right now. Martin?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen now, if that's okay. Okay, so you guys see it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can see 2 MP4 files. Is that what you're looking for?
Exactly.
Yeah,
so I'm going to present to you the final products that our team created for the Russia Museum. On the left, you can see the Ivanovo churches. On the right, you can see the Cherven site. Now, at the very beginning of the project, we had a concept discussion. We wanted to present the sites both in their current state in the 21st century, but also in their state in the 14th century. So I'm going to play the two. These you're going to see right now are the real-time VR capturings of the experiences as they're going to be presented in the museum. So first, on both of these files, you're going to see the current state of the two sites. As mentioned, on the left is Ivanovo and on the right is Cherven. So we wanted to create this presentation of the current state of the sites because we want more people to be able to see them as they are today, you know, not requiring them to travel, or people with disabilities cannot actually climb to see these places. So we wanted to share with as many people as possible how the scenes are looking today. And you can see on the right, we decided that we are going to present the Cherven area in general in an exhibition style. You're seeing the whole area, you're seeing the hill with all the remains currently there. You're also seeing some examples of artifacts seen and found on place there, and also some concepts done from other artists. These concepts on the walls, they're not done by us. They have been given to us by the Russe Museum to showcase here. And looking through the windows, you see the actual site. These are drone photos which were made into a panoramic exhibition. So looking through the windows of both the scenes, you're actually seeing the real place there. So the creation of these two scenes took a few different stages. The first one was especially hard, and this was the planning stage, because we needed to know how to approach the subject of the creation. We did a few different visits to the sites. We made some important decisions on how to capture what is there right now and how to transfer that into 3D. So we decided to use a combination of different methods. One of them is photogrammetry. So we have DSLR cameras and we use them to capture thousands of photos of the sites in order to recreate them and to scan them in this manner. We also use DSLR cameras to take multiple pictures as references to help us once we are making the 3D production later on. We also use two different drones, DJI drones, the Mavic 2 and the Phantom, to capture more than 11,000 aerial photos of the two sites in order to create the whole area of both Cherven and Ivanovo as seen from the outside. So right now on both these scenes, you're looking at the 14th century restorations that we did. Especially for Ivanovo, it was extremely difficult process to recreate all the graphics, which are unfortunately lost and have been a subject of vandalism through the recent years. So you can see that we managed to, I'm going to zoom even that, we managed to recreate these beautiful graphics with the exclusive help of Iskren and his team and a lot of research done by them. We are also working with some amazing artists from our side of the production to make sure that these graphics are as realistically represented as possible as how they were in the 14th century. And you can see here that we really brought back this church to life. The current state is it's a very sorry state. It's basically destroyed, but through working on this scene, we've given the people to the opportunity to visit history, basically, to see how all of this was looking in its glory back in the 14th century. So we are really proud of the results here, and we're really happy with how the scene turned out. And we cannot wait for the Bulgarian public in general to visit the Russe Museum in May and start to explore these scenes with the help of the VR technology. So at the other side of the screen, you're seeing the Cherven fortress recreated now. We are just entering the main gate currently. As Iskren told you, currently there are no walls higher than 2 meters. So putting on the VR and looking through the scene, you really get the sense of the scale. You really are you're really much more appreciative of what was built back then, of the glory of the whole place, of the town itself. Something that right now, if you go to Cherven and you look around, you cannot really understand how big the place was, how much structures were there, and how alive it was back in 14th century. So as I mentioned, we combined a few different techniques. Photogrammetry was one, but we also used Arctic scanner, the Leo Arctic scanner for Ivanovo, because it is basically a cave. So we cannot really take much pictures there because there isn't any lighting. But the Leo scanner, it really helps in that manner because it's a LiDAR scanner with its own structured lighting. So it helped us to capture everything there. And we had tons of information to work with. We had probably 200 gigabytes of data once we captured everything. And we had to compute that. So it took us several weeks to go through all the data to create the row scans. And only then we could begin to recreate the final geometry. Since we're speaking about VR here and real-time solutions, the final scenes, they have to be playable. So in order for them to be playable, we needed to recreate some low poly doubles of the geometry there. And we needed to transfer all of the data from the high dimensional geometry and the texturing to the low poly scenes. And this is something that we are extremely proud of because there is really no place where you can find errors, and there were errors as it always is with digital scanning, but we managed to fix them in such a way that the user will not really see anything different from the scene if they were there actually and looking at the place. So the creation took several months. Basically, the scene in Ivanovo is small in size, but the creation of all of the graphics, it took months. While Cherven, it's an extremely big scene. You have a ton of buildings, you have so much space there. So we needed to find a way to create all of the buildings, all of the different houses without them looking the same. Iskren and his team, they gave us so much information of what really was the architecture back there, what were the materials that were used, because the top priority was the creation of historically accurate scenes. And we managed to use a technique called kit bashing. So we created a ton of different elements, like different walls, stone walls, brick walls, wooden walls, different types of elements like doors and windows and everything that you now see in the scene, basically in Cherven right now. And we then use these elements, you can think of them like Lego elements. So they are all put together and helps us, the artists, to work faster that way. So the planning is very important. It's an extremely important stage where we created all of these small parts. And then we created this variety that you can see here. So each and every house is different as it was in reality. There are some unique buildings, as you can see. There are these churches and the castle, as well as the administration building and the castle walls and towers. So we've managed to create this very, very accurately, thanks to all of the information that we had. So basically, in conclusion, we are very happy with the results. The work is still ongoing. We want to add some information for the players as they go through the scene, some pop-up information through the scenes where they can read, stop and read. We also want to include music in the scenes, etc. But basically, the biggest part of the work is now completed. The scenes are created, and they're very accurate as to what they were back in the 14th century. So, as you can see, this is a great promotional tool for the museum, and we hope that people are really going to love the product, and they're going to spend a lot of time examining these two scenes and really diving into history. I'm giving the mic back to Iskren now.
Thank you very much. Just really in conclusion, because you mentioned it several times and I skipped this part, but it's important. Talking about historical accuracy, of course, everything that you see here is a hypothesis, but everything that you see relies on more than a century of investigations by our predecessors. Yes, it might not be accurate, or it might be disproven in the future, but the original is not violated, and this is the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and congratulations, Martin and Iskren, on what is a tremendous amount of work and looks phenomenal on certainly from the scenes that we've seen through here. So we will join now for some questions to finish this session, and I'd like to thank all three speakers, not only for three excellent papers that tied very well together, but for keeping very much to time. That allows us in the final panel, I think, and Juan Manuel or someone else will tell me if I'm wrong, I think we have 34 minutes more or less to be able to discuss.
Yeah, exactly. We have all the way until 3:30.
So I'm happy to privilege questions about this panel particularly, but if there's anything that people feel kind of unites some of the other papers together, maybe we can discuss those a little later. If you prefer to put your questions into the chat and ask us to read them out, then please do so. I'll happily read out on your behalf, or if you'd like to ask a question, then simply raise your hand and someone who has the capacity and the knowledge will allow you to be unmuted to do so. I'm told I have the privilege of asking the first question, and I'm enormously grateful to do so, but I'm probably going to ask one of those awkward, half-formed, silly questions. So I hope you'll forgive me if I do so a little bit. Something that united clearly all three papers, certainly from Petra's excellent research, about what students wanted from historical media, raises a series of questions about, to me, the role of, let's say, this kind of parahistoricity that we moved away from about 15 years ago. So about 15 years ago, one of the biggest arguments was about, historical media needed to be authentic, right? And there was a rubbishing of historical films, particularly because that was what a lot of people were writing about. People like Rosenstone were Robert Rosenstone were one of the few to start talking not in terms of accuracy, but in terms of authenticity and sort of questioning, and then questioning in a highly heretical way whether or not we needed to care about accuracy at all. And so we've seen this field moving away from the model of accuracy as the most useful way to judge things into a realm of authenticity, which puts the emphasis on the audience. And I am going somewhere with this, I promise. Talking about authenticity, and therefore what viewers or players or, I guess, visitors to a site like Ivanova or Chervin would look for, to what they'd expect to find as a model of kind of reliability, accuracy, and so on. But what interested me is that when we look at the roles of the people, of the phenomena we've just seen, so we've seen that tours require guides, right? Collections require curators, sites require educators or explicators, and archaeologists. Jonathan, I'm not forgetting your critical work. So all of this requires some kind of explication. And so did we move away from accuracy to authenticity because we weren't teaching and the films weren't supposed to teach? And are we now seeing a move back towards the role of education and pedagogy in that kind of creation of authenticity? So in your work, do you find that kind of role of education to be a driving element? And it was all of you said some things, but I just want to seize one thing that I think Martin said. You said the top priority was the creation of historical accuracy, which, for someone who 20 years ago was writing, we should stop caring about accuracy. That sounds heretical, but exciting, because are we now talking about accuracy again? So I wonder, what do you think the role of education is in these paramedievalisms or medievalisms? That's a question to all three of you or anyone.
Well, if I might be able to say some thing on this first. So it's kind of an interesting issue where it's partly affected by the fact that despite how the conversation has sort of shifted within, critical appraisals of historical or historical-based media, a lot of historical media in itself has increasingly lead into, if not literal accuracy, nevertheless the idea of an assumed this is authentic to how it was. Any conversation around Game of Thrones, for example, involved that, despite equally any historian being able to rip it right apart in terms of what its actual assumptions about the medieval period were, but it nevertheless relied on people going, yeah, that's what the medieval period was like. And so you get into this issue where, yeah, people increasingly have expectations that they then want met, even though those expectations might not be based on something. And even if the media itself isn't specifically claiming to have a actual authority in these matters, people can start to give it such, which then creates the issue that when you start to have media that very much does claim that authenticity, that authority to speak on matters, whether it's just the marketing of this is accurately researched versus we have literally got curriculums based around this product now, it does shift a lot of the weight of the question back on, okay, are you actually being accurate or authentic? What are you trying to tell and teach people? Or versus just like, oh, hey, it's neat you actually referenced that thing as an extra.
Thank you.
If it's okay, I would like to say something.
Please.
So I would like to say that films, series, and video games have a great role in your education, not just students or like something population that likes history, but all of them, because young people, students, high school students, elementary school students also have widely available content that is historically in some way inaccurate, because they are all watching, I don't know, some video on TikToks and something like that. And do we want something that is not historically accurate to learn our students? Because as historians, we will never know how that actually was, because we saw sources and everything, but the truth is far away from us in that way that we could reconstruct it. That is Martin what said, because and to conclude, I just want to say that we need to be more historically accurate, as we should be, but we can't. I'm so sorry. I'm very nervous right now. So we can run away from the historical inaccuracy, but we should be trying to limitate it in some ways that are still educational. And because the more content that is not historically accurate, the wider population will accept something that is funny, but not as representative to the history. I hope I was clear. I don't know. I'm
very clear.
Very nervous. I'm sorry.
Very clear. I empathize entirely with the nerves, but you have no need to be. That was a very eloquent response to the question. Thank you. Iskren and Martin?
Yes, if I can also join. When addressing the education aspect, I'm skipping the word pedagogical, because maybe we're not talking only about minors. Because, for example, the audience in Bulgaria, like everywhere else, the society follows trends. Now, back in the days, back in maybe 50 or 60 years ago, we have very, how to say, savage examples of treating archaeological heritage when it was rebuilt with concrete. And it was rebuilt not following authenticity or accuracy. It had to be rebuilt for the purposes of the nation building. So nowadays we have several generations that have grown up with these castles being rebuilt, and for them this is original, but this is not. Not only this, but we also have these visitors coming to Cherven, and Cherven is again proud to be preserved the way it was, and these people are expecting such thing that they themselves call butaphorical. But they expect butaphorical because they are, okay, let's say, educated this way. that this is right, but this is not right. So maybe this is also another aspect of educational theme.
Right. I mean, yeah, one of the things that, sorry, Martin, did I just speak over you there?
Oh, I can also give my opinion, but
Please do.
Okay. Well, my opinion, first of all, is somewhat of a outsider because I'm not a historian. I'm a 3D artist. So I think that both games, movies, and fantasy in general has its place to bring this spark of, you know, curiosity through people. And it certainly played a role in my life in this respect. But working on projects such as Cherven and Ivanovo, we also have this amazing curiosity when it comes to diving into the past. I personally went to both sides several times. I've spoken to Iskren. He gave me so much information and books on the subjects, and it's extremely interesting to dive inside that and to see, okay, is this real, and how real can we show it? Because yeah, I see the foundations of the houses, I see the foundations of the walls, and I can recreate the rocks that were used there, exactly the same ones. But am I creating the same doors? Am I creating the same you know, chimneys and exactly the same like the crane? There is a crane there that was used to lift stuff from the bottom of the hill. And as Iskren said, this is a hypothesis, and as such, we can never know if it was the real thing. But we do our best as artists to create something that has educational purposes, not only fantasy-related, you know, experience that is joyful to watch, it's interesting to go through, but also to educate people. So we're doing our best, and I think that you can relate to that as historians, you guys can only do your best to show something, but if it really was that, we may never know. So
right, and that follows so neatly, yes, onto the question of, you know, sometimes the role of historical reenactment is to recreate environments where people might ask historically significant questions, which is you know, an incredibly valuable element to the inclusivity. I saw that there's a message in the chat from James, and Juan Manuel, you raised your hand. Juan Manuel, is your point related to this one? Do you want to take the floor then? And then we'll come to James Bailey.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have two questions. One would be for Jonathan and one would be for Martin, but I want to begin with Martin's because I was actually wanted to ask you precisely about that, right? As scholars, we don't have enough opportunities to actually talk with the artist part of this form of recreations. And as you've been mentioning, the other panelists have been mentioning, there are always going to be blank spots that we simply cannot access, either because the source is not there, or as you say, you have the foundations of the house, but the rest is lost. So precisely from this artistic process perspective, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Iskren gave you books and information, but which other sources you actually use when recreating this space? Like, for example, nearby villages that had maybe houses that you could use as models, or maybe popular media, or a school education. So that would be like the question in the reconstruction of all of these, where are all these inspirations coming from those things that we know that we really, I mean, we simply do not have them. There's no way to access them directly.
Yeah, at the concept stage, we dealt with this question in detail, and we created something of a, we in the industry called a mood board or an inspiration board. It's basically concept which gathers information from the time period that we are examining. So yeah, there are other fortresses or remains throughout Bulgaria from the same period. There are also examples from other countries from the same period. So yeah, Iskren was very thorough in finding such examples, showing us such examples of how more preserved historical heritage areas look like. And we tied this, you know, this is a style example, and we tied this with specific findings on Cherven. Like they know the types of rocks, definitely. They know where they get to, where the people from the 14th century got them from. They also found remains of wood, burned up wood, so they know the type of wood used in the creation of the doors and the windows, etc. They found specific clues that point in such direction that, okay, we know that the church's roofs were looking similar to this, or we anticipate that the walls of the churches and the important buildings were better defined than the roughly used rocks for the houses. We also know like the citadel had these big buildings, so the rich people lived there. So these rich people, they can afford to use better materials, they can afford to create higher houses. Like their houses were 2-story houses, while the rest of the houses outside of the citadel were 1-story houses. They had wooden roofs, or they have straw roofs. So these are some of the things that we've been discussing back and forward with Iskren all through the creation of a process. And it's something that I find really exciting, because you know that you don't have the information, but creating this hypothesis is actually something that it takes enthusiasm and it takes curiosity to create. And of course, you need to be certain that you're not fooling anybody who is later going and checking these exhibitions. And we want to help kids learn, and we want to be accurate, so we do our best there.
Thank you. And my other question, which is for Jonathan, thank you for your presentation on the case of Assassin's Creed and the Discovery Tour, because what you mentioned, I mean, I agree a lot with what you say, right? It's pretty much going back to Chapman's categories on games about realist and conceptual, that these realist simulations carry so much power in themselves, in the power of the representation of the simulation, that they convey the authority of realism. And as you have said, I mean, there are of course problems with anyone who claims to be authoritatively approaching the past. Of course, one of the things is that we as historians, we are aware that in the end, any approach to history is just a narrative, is whatever we can reconstruct. And I was wondering if to some extent, somehow the Discovery Tour addresses this issue that in the end, even if it is subtextually, in the end, we are just showing you, again, like this, making this differentiation between history and the past. That would be like the question. Does to some extent, these type of exercises make that differentiation, that they are doing history, they're not recreating the past as it was? And if they don't, that's what I would suspect, like maybe if any of the people here have any opinion on how this could be done in a space, in something like a game, being able to convey this difference between history and the past.
Yeah, it flirts with it on occasion, particularly when some of the more detailed displays that have talk about the speculative aspects of what they're discussing. But a lot of the time, it does function like you would if you go to a museum exhibition and there's the content on the label, and it presents itself as fairly basic and authoritative just to make it simpler for the person reading it to get it in that moment. And sometimes by also then going more into detail, it can come off as more authoritative, like, we're really confident in what we're saying about this, rather than, here's a decent hypothesis that's been a standard for about 10 years now, but there might be a guy working on a paper somewhere that might change it sort of thing. And it is an interesting one because they've now sort of cycled through differing formats for the Discovery Tour in itself. As I say, this one, they focused a lot more on a narrative experience where you are playing the character going through it, rather than, as in, say, the Odyssey version of the Discovery Tour, where you have someone who is ostensibly from the period talking to you. Like, you get Socrates speaking to you, sort of, in thing. Where Origin was just much more, here's a display with information on it. So there is potentially room and for different approaches there. Part of the difficulty, I suppose, for Assassin's Creed is its whole conceit and premise, where it's, you know, this is the past. You are living it through someone's literal genetic memories. It was the mid-2000s when they came up with this concept. And so that kind of lends that, even with the whole disclaimer they put up at the start of every game, you know, this is a work of fiction created by multiple people of multiple backgrounds, etc., that creates that assumption of authority. This is not, we are telling a story of the past. This is the past. You are living it. And so you kind of have a murky framing device there.
I think that's a very smart reading of it, because I've always read the beginning of Assassin's Creed as a sort of protecting themselves politically from any misrepresentation, but say we have all these people, so everybody kind of agrees with it. But as you say, it's also a claim of authority. Many people of different cultures came with this version, hence this is probably very, very, very accurate. Thank you for that.
Otherwise, it just doesn't relate as much, doesn't factor in when you just have that basic premise in itself.
Fantastic, thank you. I will pass the microphone over to James.
Hello, am I being audible? Good. Right, yes. So I kind of continuing this accuracy conversation. We've been discussing, you know, accuracy, not accuracy, but I think one of the questions that I was particularly thinking of this on Petra's paper is the question of what people rate and think about when they're thinking about accuracy. So, you know, people relate comparatively easily to things like visual accuracy, and we have relatively good material for that because we have, you know, at least some archaeological material that can be worked on, whereas, you know, we don't have, you know, day-to-day diaries of peasant life in the Middle Ages or whatever in nearly the same way. So people often know less about, and then it's harder to recreate accuracy in like social dynamics and structures, and that I think sometimes leads students or the public to kind of underrate that and think about it less as being an important part of what the accurate medieval experience looks like. So yeah, I guess I'd be interested in everyone's thoughts on the, you know, how do we get across with these various like engagement systems, not just the like what of medieval world, but also, you know, the why, the how people are doing things. And yeah, I've got a sort of second, much more specific question for Martin, but I'll sort of leave that till we've had this bit of chat.
So I could say an example, because the students in my research said that the most popular film among the students were Braveheart. And for example, I thought that I think that they are referred to the, I don't know, like romantical versions that were represented in the movie, and that love that they saw in the movie was like more modern love, in which we are looking at now, and not the medieval love that were like courteous love or something like that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think the authenticity, of course, we don't know how really one medieval peasant was looking for love, but it was surely not in this modern context.
As another consideration within the whole, you know, how do we get people to at least grasp that there are things beyond simply material cultures in terms of understanding the past and how it functioned? To some extent, and particularly within the context of video games, you know, you can sort of get some mileage out of like literally systemizing whatever cultural aspect there is, but that can quickly run into issues, particularly if you've ever been familiar with a min-maxer, someone who exploits mechanical systems to maximize, let's say, the profit for them in terms of playing the game. So like Crusader Kings 2, I think, has done, at least for its particular community, done a lot in getting people to think more about how personal social dynamics between liege and subjects were, you know, a massive factor, particularly within the early medieval period in terms of how is structured and functioned. but it runs into the issue where you can both stretch it beyond its plausible means, but also people can obsess too much over those specific mechanics as manifestations of those social dynamics, rather than treating it as, you know, vague and particular application of it. So, for example, within the game, you know, you can pretty readily declare war on someone of a different faith. Say you're in Wales as a Catholic ruler and you want to get some cash real quick. Just declare war on the Vikings in the north, go to the Pope asking for some money to wage a holy war, and you're done. Obviously, that's not a reflection of reality of that time, but it's something that comes about as a merging of the systems they developed to represent something from other particular places. And you get into inverse issues where if something is absent as a mechanic, then that can also affect people's understanding of things. Where, going back to Valhalla again, one thing a lot of people picked up on shortly after the game's release was the fact that you, as a player character, cannot harm civilians. Now, this is a franchise staple. It has been a thing since the first game. But in the first game, you're playing a member of the Secretive Order of Assassins whose whole duty is like protecting personal liberties and whatnot. And at the very least, certainly in the context of the game, those are the local people. Those are people on your side. Whereas in Valhalla, you are literally playing a Viking, raiding monasteries and the like, and yet the game will suddenly throw you off for trying to hack at people. And while that sort of in turn is only worth commentary because everyone knows that Vikings did unfortunately rather kill a lot of people as a result of their activities, it leans into reinforcing the idea that, you know, maybe they were softer and didn't do it as much as just spoke. Which, yeah, that is true. But the way the game presents that idea maybe goes overboard because, you know, it's a mechanical thing rather than the cultural context informing that mechanic as such.
And Iskren and Martin, did you want to respond to that? If not, we can pass to James's next question. So Martin, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. We can pass to the next question. If
Okay,
you like.
and I've pasted it to you, Martin, because it's a very specific question about lighting.
Yeah. The question is there any trade-off when it comes to like, for example, the Ivan was seen where there is a lot of lighting inside of this cave church, and there is, because first of all, the lighting in the scene is completely fictional. I cannot really say what the lighting conditions were back in the 14th century. One of the main issues here, as I mentioned, the church is destroyed currently, but more than that, one of the walls, the rock walls, has collapsed. So we've rebuilt that, and we don't know exactly if there was a big window there, if there were 5 windows, if there were windows at all back there. So the other thing that we don't know is how many candles were there. There might have been thousands of candles. There might have been 10 candles. We cannot really say that. So yeah, there is a trade-off when it comes to the experience of the player that is actually going to go through the whole thing. And I think this really ties off to the previous question in terms of you are discussing specific decisions, let's say for Assassin's Creed. Now, I do know people from the team working on the game and working on these games, because there is an Ubisoft studio here in Bulgaria, and I know how the process works when it comes to making decisions on creating a game. You're working with a lot of constrictions when it comes to creating something that people will pay to play. So you're looking for experience over accuracy. You're looking for attention, and nobody actually I'm being a bit direct here, but nobody actually cares if they're sacrificing authenticity when it comes to creating a product which they invest billions sometimes. Now there are games in nowadays which are almost $1 billion in venture capital investments and marketing after that. So they're actually working to create a product, a fantasy, and this is why they always have this, text at the beginning of the game. This is a work of art. It is very important to mention that because it is not an educational tool. And as I said earlier, yes, this game can spark a lot of interest and curiosity in young minds for them to pursue a career of, let's say, being a historian at some point in their life by playing a fantasy which is definitely not accurate. And this is why I don't think that any game of the ones mentioned in your researches and basically all historian games are accurate. At least they try to be semi-accurate so that they are not too difficult to swallow from people who have some knowledge, but their main priority is selling the game. So they are selling this state that you get when you play the game, this flow state. They want to keep your attention at all times. This is why they will definitely create things that will shock you. They will create things that are extremely not in the realm of reality of what actually could happen to a character, as long as they can keep your attention. This is the most important thing.
If it's okay, I would like to just correct Martin in one statement. Someone does care if it's accurate or inaccurate, because my research shows that students want more authenticity and more accuracy. And if there is more accuracy, they are willing to pay and watch video games, films, and etc. So maybe the statement that you said, semi-accurate, is something that offers a dialogue between the workers and the ones that are playing or watching.
Yeah, the studio executives, they are willing to make this trade-off. They are the ones who are willing to sacrifice authenticity in order to create a more engaging game. And of course, they're going to create realistic buildings and realistic towns, etc. But when it comes to real events, that will only make them destroy parts of their storytelling. Like for example, Assassin's Creed, there are so many fantasy things that happen there and so many connections between societies and things that we can only assume are fantasy, but they're doing this deliberately. They know that some people care of accuracy, but on their statistics, when they make these financial decisions, they say, okay, how many people would care if we make this historically inaccurate? And if the question, the answer there is, okay, it's 2% of people of the 250 million kids who are going to play the game, if 2% are the ones who really care if this is accurate, well, this is a small percentage, and we are willing to, make the decision to not go with the authenticity.
I'm going to leap in here because we're running up to the end of the session, and I'd like to ask Tess to ask her final question there. So,
cool.
Hi, Tess.
Thank you. Really interesting conversation, though. Thank you all for your papers. I actually wanted to ask quite a specific question to Petra. From the kind of research that you were doing and the responses from your students. So I work on games, but I noticed just from the kind of lists that you threw up of the different media texts that you kind of had for the students to engage with or respond to, that the films that we often talk about, and you mentioned Braveheart just now, which I think is one of the, the big name kind of ones, they're all sort of 15, 20 years ago almost, but then TV series and games that we talk about are often sort of in the last 5 years almost, or things like Game of Thrones that are kind of continually coming out. And there's often a lot less reference to kind of shows from 30 years ago or so versus these sort of big films that are still really touchstone films. So I was just wondering if you could kind of comment on that trend, if there were there students who mentioned much more recent, there was maybe 1 or 2 kind of more recent films in the list. Did they mention those, or do you think that's kind of reflective of, I don't know, what kind of trend, I guess, if you can kind of comment in the last 1 minute on that?
I will try to be as short
Huge
as I
question.
can. I picked out those films from IMDb, but I think that Braveheart has the most popular because it is very often on Croatian TVs. It's like maybe every 2 or 3 months you can see the Braveheart on the Croatian TV. I don't know why it's like that. It's probably because it's popular. And for the series, I think the large number of students use Netflix, and the Game of Thrones, the Vikings, The Witcher was on Netflix. So I think that there is a difference. So I don't know why. Of course, the Kingdom of Heaven is also very popular on Croatian TV. So maybe because of that. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, the kind of rerun element. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for my answer. Question.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to be forced to draw it to a close to avoid arousing the anger of the organizing committee, even though I think everyone in this room could stay talking about this for quite substantially longer. So I want to close by thanking all 4 of our speakers for 3 fantastic, wonderful, and genuinely thought-provoking papers. Obviously, I have to say that as chair, but they were really fascinating papers. I tremendously enjoyed it, and thank you to the organizing committee for letting me chair this one. I will hand over to you to trail the next slot.
Okay, so again, thank you everyone. Thank you for the panelists. It was a really, really exciting panel. Thank you, Andrew, for chairing the session. We will have our closing keynote lecture at 4 p.m. It will be done by Professor Josh Carney from the American University in Beirut. And it's titled The Middle of What? Disorienting Visions and Received Wisdom in Turkish Historical TV Drama. So we hope to see you all there. It sounds like a very exciting lecture. We also want to remind you that we have been uploading our panels to our YouTube channel in case you missed in case you would like to take a look to those that you missed. And also, we also want to invite you tonight at 7 p.m. We will have an informal coming together with the organizing team if you would like to join us to have some drinks and have a chat after the conference. So we hope to see you then. Thank you again, and we'll see you in half an hour.
Thank you. Bye.